Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the grand finals of the Malaysian Nationals School Debating Championship. First off, I'd like to congratulate both teams for making it this far. In government, we have SFK Kota Komune. In opposition, we have Nobel International School. Before we go any further, I'd like to state some ground rules. For those of you who are here with us in the hall, if you guys want to keep your phones on silence, it will be very much appreciated. Don't move in and out of the halls as to not disrupt the speaker's speeches, as well as keep cheering and jeering to a minimum as we want to keep this debate very clean. But besides that, let me introduce to you guys the adjudication panel that we have here today. From Monash, we have myself, Giri. From IIUM, we have Salini. We have Ilsa. And Jeremy. From Quah, we have Mukris. We have Sia. And we have Iman. From Kaigelz, we have Katrina. We have Kira. And Raksana. From Health, we have Kanda. From DJ, we have Ryan. And from Kingview, we have Nandy. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, on the motion that this House regrets the sympathetic portrayals of real crimes/crimes in TV series and movies, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to start the debate. Yes, sir.
Do I need to use the mic?
Yes.
To see a bunch of people tweeting about how it's justified to be a drug cartel just because you want to help your family, just because you think it's altruistic, is something we find morally abhorrent under our side. Government stance is really simple. We just want the most amount of closure for victims. We want the most amount of deterrence under our side, and we think we need the best amount of representation of victims and perpetrators through this media. And we are more than happy to release like real life documentaries or even the kind of TV shows have like objective neutral representation. We don't want like extremely violent or malicious representation of these individuals. I think the burden we're going to prove to win this debate is how we provide better closure and representation, and also how we provide the best representation and how it's better for individuals under our paradigm. And I think the end goal is that we just want better portrayal. Firstly, some characterizations, right? What is the influence of TV shows towards these individuals, right? So like we have a lot of famous actors acting in and which have large impacts on individuals, right? And more often than not, these things also have a lot of side storylines and romantic background storylines to pander to different communities to watch. So we can already come on the premise that TV shows have a lot of influence, and so does books. And the characterization, right, is like, firstly, what do they do in these movies, right? What are the kinds of sympathetic portrayals that they show? Firstly, they justify like certain crimes because of their birth lottery or because of the fact that they're victims of circumstances, right? So, and recognize that most of these forms of media have certain elements from real life, right? For example, Narcos is literally about Pablo Escobar, but the way they portray this individual is by showing everyone that he's a family man, right? That a crime is just a part of his personality. And we think the dominant narrative that exists is the narrative in these movies that they commit crime because they have someone or they have something that's really precious to them that they want to protect. And we think this sympathetic portrayal is usually coupled up with narratives that most other aspects of these individuals are completely normal, with just a few psychopathic tendencies, right? Or they're like really loving people and they're like dog lovers, for example. These are the kinds of things to show that they're really sympathetic people. And we tell you, this leads to like, what are the perception of viewers in when they watch it, right? Firstly, on a more extreme level, but it's something that is a very likely scenario, is that there's a certain romanticization of certain crimes, right? Because these individuals feel justified to commit certain crimes when feelings are connected to it, right? For example, crimes of passion. People feel that it's much more justified if my favorite actor did it and he had certain emotions connected to it. These are the kind of romanticizations of crimes that happen. But on a much wider spectrum, right, we think that this causes trigger warning to victims, and this is a large a chunk of my case that we think is really important and impactful, right? Closure can never be obtained under Galbo, because recognize when you have like certain, like if you want a movie or your book to be a bestseller, right? You want the people to love the antagonist, right? You want these people to love their criminals, the criminal, so you're more likely to have other qualities that pander to these kinds of viewers. But the thing is this, right? The reason why the sufferings of victims are extremely trivialized is because when you look at the kinds of discussions that happen when people watch these movies about how much they love this certain criminal, right? That regardless of what he did, it's completely justified. If I am a rape victim and someone idealizes or shows that a rapist is actually a really sympathetic person in a movie, I'm less likely to feel that rape is something that's really huge, right? These are the kinds of things that happen. We think it's really it's a shame that they never allow proper closure for these victims on itself, right? But I also think there's a misrepresentation of how crime actually happens when you sympathize with criminals in movies, right? People don't really get a full picture as to how crimes happen, right? Especially when it comes to like organized crimes or like corporate crimes, like for example, Wolf of Wall Street or Narcos, where there are more complex aspects to these crimes, which people don't really understand, right? But when you sympathize this individual, you put in a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions that's really connected to this individual. It means and the worst part of this is that there's only one narrative, right? That the reasons why these individuals do it is extremely altruistic, these individuals are people who deserve to integrate into the society, when most often times we don't think that's the case because of the reason. And we think that's when like retribution is less likely to happen, right? When victims feels the need to be protected, they're less likely to feel protected when they watch these movies. And even in our what does our world really look like under our paradigm, right? Firstly, we think like the world that we really prefer is the storyline depicts the way that it is, right? So individuals with malicious intent can be under their paradigm shown as it is, but victims of circumstances, or they have like certain soft stories in the background, we will make their crimes unsympathetic but more neutral, right? So we'll have like, just reasons as to why they do this crime instead of attaching certain emotions or attaching certain scenes that make these emotions or feelings more palatable to individuals. I'll take one later. But I think the biggest benefit that this provides in our world is, firstly, there's a better form of representation, right? Because why? There's a better deterrence. Because when you stop having sympathetic portrayals of these individuals, that means people actually realize that there are social consequences to a crime. Because why? In TV shows like Narcos, right? What happens is these TV shows want a happy ending, right? So even if this person goes to jail and serve the time due, or even in these books where these individuals face all their legal consequences, when they come back, their happy ending is their family still accepts them, their entire society still accepts them. That is the narrative that will exist under your side, right? These kinds of social consequences is something that needs to be propagated to these individuals for them to understand what it's actually like to commit a crime and what are the actual consequences. Your side never provides them. And we think that even in our worst case, right? And in our worst case, people may not have sympathetic views towards individuals who are criminals, right? Like you're more likely to hate a criminal under our paradigm. But we feel, for two reasons, it's much better on a comparative, because under their paradigm, criminals are perceived to be completely normal individuals who commit crime for legitimate reasons, and there's never a shift in narrative, right? There's only one certain narrative that like criminals are inherently good people who just do certain things, for like reasons that we should be able to understand, right? And also, we think that the romanticization is also a reason why we don't want the sympathetic portrayals, right? We don't want these people to opt into a life of crime. Oftentimes, maybe stealing seems like a much easier option. Maybe committing a crime of passion seems like a much a better option. But justifying these crimes by being sympathetic towards them is something we are principally and morally against.
the speech. I now like to call upon the leader of opposition to call the case for side opposition.
Yes,
Criminals are humans too, and a lot of the times, the reasons why these criminals commit these crimes is due to things like the failure of the state or structural problems, or the fact that they are surrounded by people who commit crime as well. Ignoring this fact will not help solve crime. Rather, it will make crime even worse, and we think that the number of victims that suffer under the side of government will be significantly larger. I have two arguments for you today. That is how we make society less hostile towards criminals and why this is so important. And my second argument, how we improve closure for victims, but before that, a couple of rebuttals. So they said that it was morally abhorrent for criminals to commit crime because of circumstances around them. But we think, in principle, as long as it's something they couldn't control and an influence they didn't consent to, we think it's fine. We think it's not their fault. The second thing they said is that by being sympathetic, we would largely trivialize the struggle of victims, but we think the side of government is exaggerating a little bit. So we think that by showing the sympathetic stories, we can really show why the crime was caused. These criminals still serve their sentence and still get their punishment, but there's an added dimension to this movie that explains the background story, and we think this information that we can provide is essential in solving crime. Maybe we cannot look like the most just people. Maybe we can't heavily punish victims, and maybe we can't heavily punish perpetrators of crime. But this information is necessary to improve, to help society better manage crime and reduce the number of victims that suffer. You cannot show the story of criminals and why they commit crime without being sympathetic, and that's why we think it's an important element. So how do books and TV influence people? So actors tend to build cults of personality around these. People tend to build cults of personality around actors, and they greatly adore the actors acting in this movie and really adore the characters. And we think it's likely that society will accept the perception that these criminals are humans too, and the reason they commit crime isn't because they are inherently bad. Now to my first argument, how we make society less hostile. So why will society become less hostile? Because people know that these criminals are not inherently evil, and people will feel like there's hope for them becoming better. What is the exclusive benefit that we can provide to you that we think will help reduce the suffering under the side of opposition? So we get better integration for ex-convicts. There will be less hostile interactions between ex-convicts and people in society, and people are less likely to deny you jobs and say horrible things about them. And this is extremely important because it allows ex-convicts to build a life independent of crime. It allows them to have new friends, jobs, and we think this support structure is essential in preventing them from recommitting the crime. Reasons why a lot of rates of recidivism are high is because a lot of criminals, when they come out of jail, don't have friends, don't have a good support structure, and when you demonize them even more in your books and movies, that is when the crime rates become higher. This is really bad for two reasons. One, because someone who wasn't actually inherently a bad person and had the opportunity to change ends up recommitting the crime and go back to jail because of an exaggeration of their story and because so many people hate on them. Although they were not originally bad and the victim that they recommitted the crime to could have been protected. They will upscale their crimes because of an extra resentment towards society, because they feel like they're continuously punished and no one is recognizing their plight. This is when they act out and become even worse. So although we cannot grant justice for victim after the crime has been committed, at least we prevent it from being committed in the first place. This prevents so when they recommit the crime, it creates a cycle of victims and more people suffer, and that's when the problem increases. So we think another benefit we can provide is we create better policies. So how does this happen? When people make policies and legislation about dealing with criminals, oftentimes they are driven by hate and anger, and the decisions they make aren't the best decisions and often are irrational and aren't in the best interest of society. Although Although there's a lot of hate and anger and people are demanding justice for victims, the only way to ever truly gain justice for them is if we can use the information that we have in a rational way to protect them. People often support policies that have higher incarceration rates and longer sentences, although longer sentences have proven to have increased recidivism rates. People will start defunding rehabilitation programs and pay less attention to the condition of prisons. Although there's a lot of research that shows that the conditions of prisons actually cause people to commit crime in the future. So we think that if we can create better policies and protect victims, that is the best form of justice that we can give them. Now to my second argument, how we improve the closure for victims. So the reason why victims don't get closure, and this is in direct contention with their biggest argument, is because a lot of anger and hatred is directed to the person that committed the crime to them. They will feel constantly threatened by a person of the fear returning. But if they know that the state is putting efforts into preventing this from happening again, they will be less scared because there's a lower likelihood of it happening again. They will have less resentment and more closure because they no longer attach fear or blame to one person. Rather, they view it as an unfortunate circumstance as a result of structural problems, and they feel hope that this is a problem that can be fixed. We think this is the best benefit we can offer victims. There's less fear of, they have a less fear of the perpetrator returning because they know that the state is putting efforts into improving rehabilitation, and they fully understand the reason why perpetrators commit crimes. If we can make victims feel like that we are working towards reducing crime rates, that is the best way we can protect them after a crime has occurred. The outcome to this is that victims will have more closure. So even if we can't achieve it right away, the fact that victims can feel like they are being protected and feel like the state is doing something to ensure that crime rates are being reduced, we think that's the best way they can move past it regardless of whether it's true or not. If they can direct their anger towards the state because of the failure of the state to provide welfare for criminals, the failure of the state to ensure that areas have good education and good welfare rates so that people don't have to commit crime, we think that when victims understand these reasons, they can direct their anger towards the state. And this anger is better directed towards the state than to the actual perpetrators of the crime, because when victims direct their anger towards the state, it results in legislations and better policies that help to reduce crime rate as a whole.
I think the leader of opposition for the speech. Now to continue the case inside government, Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah.
In the 1970s, Pablo Escobar was one of the most ruthless criminals that we had in Colombia, because this was a person who was an active drug trafficker that turned Latin America into the drug haven that we know in status quo. But it's really, really pathetic that movies like Narcos actually depict him as an individual that actually has legitimate grievances. There's actually a meme on Facebook that depicts him as a really, really caring father because he was the person who burned all his money that he got from drug trafficking by making sure that his shivering daughter doesn't get caught. I think it's disgusting that society allows these kinds of things to happen. I think it's disgusting that society makes sure that these criminals will never face any form of social consequences. These are the very movies that tell criminals it's okay for you to do this as long as you have a way to get out of these kinds of crimes. I think it's disgusting that you defend these kinds of individuals. So I'm going to prove 3 things in my speech. Firstly, what then happens to victims and how and whose side actually provides much better closure. Secondly, how is it that people actually perceive these very crimes themselves, and how is it that in our world we are better at preventing these people from even acting out these kinds of criminal tendencies in the first place. Thirdly, even if individuals are less sympathetic towards individuals who have committed crime out of circumstances, why is it that the comparative in our world is still something that is better, right? So before moving on to the third argument, I just have to move on to 3 main contentious issues. The first, on victims of circumstances. Now I understand that victims are humans too, but I think that the vast majority of their analysis fails to deal with the fact that the vast majority of criminals that are within society themselves, the individuals who are all involved in organized crime, the very individuals who are heavily romanticized by these kinds of movies. These are the vast majority of individuals who usually get away with their crimes because they have the ability to pay for better lawyers. But even then, on a second level, we will engage with the fact that they are victims of circumstances in status quo. I think it's important for these individuals to actually realize that there are social consequences that you face if you ever to be in a position where you're forced to make a choice whether you're to opt into a life of crime or not. I think in your world, what you do is that you tell these individuals it's okay for you to opt into crime because you're inherently innocent in the first place. Because it's arbitrary, because you're arbitrarily born in these kinds of circumstances. Therefore, all the crimes that you're doing is now currently justified. The comparative in our world is that in our world, we represent these kinds of criminals in their most realistic manner. We expose all the horrific crimes they have committed, and we tell them what are the consequences as to your actions. The second thing was on reintegration and on rehabilitation. So insofar as I don't understand why is it something that's mutually exclusive, I was still engage with it. Because we say that rehabilitation is better in our world when people actually realize that if you ever were to be a criminal, you will never have the ability to even be accepted into society. That is to say that if you are put in a particular position where you're forced to make a dilemma, that is when there's less of incentive for you to opt into these kinds of things, because you realize that rehabilitation is really, really hard. You realize that reintegration into society is really, really hard. And it's important for me to never ever involve myself within crime. The third thing to say is the third contentious issue, which is on closure, right? Because I understand that they also want to co-opt this benefit. They want to tell you that, we also get closure because in our world, individuals feel they're much more protected. They feel as if the state is actually doing something. No, I think in these kinds of movies, what usually happens is that the narratives of these kinds of victims are usually like the side plots of these kinds of movies. Usually these are victims that are seen more as collateral damage to the pursuit of wealth that Pablo Escobar actually wanted to pursue, right? So I don't think you get closure in your world when literally the narrative of a rape victim or the narrative of a murder victim is literally casted away as a counter narrative to the entire plot. When they're just seen as individuals who are insignificant within society, because the major discussion and the major discourse is about the validity of Pablo Escobar's actions. So on the much more contentious issues, I'll bring forth to you my third argument, which is on the confirmation of criminal tendencies and on how we actually achieve that period, right? So if you can prove that we actually prevent individuals from even accessing crime in the first place, we say we take this entire issue. Because notice that the most important stakeholder in this debate are individuals who are in that particular circumstance, where they are forced to think whether or not drug trafficking is something that I should do to make sure that my family actually puts food on the table. These are individuals who have slight criminal tendencies. In your world, I think these individuals are more likely to act out on these kinds of tendencies for 3 reasons. Firstly, if I was a loyal fan of Narcos, I would be conditioned to think that Pablo Escobar was an individual who had legitimate grievances towards the Colombian whole. This means that I'll think that it's okay for me to join a life of crime as long as it actually helps my family, as long as it actually alleviates the suffering that Pablo Escobar tried to do. But the second thing to say is that you actually provide the narrative that there is actually a way for you to escape your crimes at the point at which you actually do try hard enough. Because if you're a businessman, if you watch The Wolf of Wall Street, you realize that Jordan Belfort actually manipulated his entire way through corporate world. And you realize and you think that that's something that's perfectly okay for me to do, as long as there are methods out there, as long as there's techniques out there that I can actually see. But the third reason is, let's say that you are the son, let's say that you're a family member of a particular individual who actually has some form of criminal tendencies. I think you're less likely to report on your family members when you actually watch these kinds of movies and you realize the support that these kinds of individuals get from their family members. Because the narrative that is set out is that if you as a family member hide the crimes of your child, this is when you are able to make sure that your family's reputation isn't at stake in status quo. The impact of this is that it's extremely detrimental because it stifles public awareness on the need to actually combat crime, which means that the individual himself has a greater inclination towards crime when he ever faces any form of socio-economic problems. Because you normalize the idea that it's okay for you to opt into a life of crime as long as the circumstances that you are in is similar to Pablo Escobar. But the second thing to say is that it's less likely for these kinds of individuals to ever control their own tendencies, because there's no incentive for me to stop myself from shoplifting every time every time I watch these kinds of movies. The comparative is really, really simple in our world. We depict them in the most realistic light. We make sure that we expose all the horrific crimes these individuals will do. So in our world, there's at least a greater tendency for these individuals to rationalize the decision, to realize that there are a lot of social consequences that you actually face as an individual. We think that the romanticization of crime actually blinds society from the truth. Proud to promote.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. I now invite the Deputy Leader for Opposition for silence.
Criminals are just as much the victim of crimes as the victims themselves. And I think the side of opposition, the side of government, was very dismissive to the numerous amounts of characterization that my leader of opposition gave you. That being said, three things I'll answer in this speech. Firstly, where do we better deter criminals? Secondly, where do we provide better closure for victims? And thirdly, even if you don't believe in any of that, why in principle, we cannot allow criminals that were victims of circumstance to suffer for no reason. Firstly, with regards to deterrence, we think individuals are more likely to fund policies for better prevention of crime when they see a need to solve the problem as opposed to punish the criminal. Considering the nuance that there's a finite amount of funding and there's a finite amount of political will to do something about criminals, individuals are less likely to support policies that punish criminals more and more likely to support policies for better rehabilitation or to prevent crime, and more money is likely to be funded into those things, hence preventing the net amount of crime that happens. Secondly, I think when individuals see the conditions that cause the crime, they are more likely to know how to solve the problem to prevent that crime. They are more likely to support better welfare, they are more likely to support better hospitals and better schools. This is simply because more people have understanding of what conditions cause the crime. The comparative in their world is individuals not being equipped with this information and more likely just wanting to punish the criminal as opposed to solve the reason why the crime was committed as well. They view deal with the symptoms of the problem, but not the problem itself. We are more capable of getting to the root of the problem, which is lack of education, lack of welfare, and so on. The third response that we have is that often the real outcome is that we tell people in our social circles, close family, close friends, and how and a lot of times in a lot of instances, everyone has capacity to individual from the crime, criminals, and sympathetic, we more likely to individual and understand and more likely to individual by saying it's not your fault for committing these crimes. We understand why you should do, and I think you know and there's a lot of better deter these individuals from committing a crime. Comparatively, your whole person from having these thoughts and because society hates me, what's the point of serving a society that hates me to begin with and doesn't understand my circumstances whatsoever? What's the comparative, right? Maybe in the short term we have a larger amount of crime, but in a world where we have more capacity to change the perception of individuals, we break the cycle of individuals repeatedly committing crime and individuals having so much incentive to commit crime. In their world, yes, the rate of crime may stay the same for now, but it will continue to stay the same because we don't fix the problem at hand. So on a net, they create more amount of victims than they actually protect. Secondly, with regards to closure and rehabilitation. First, with regards to rehabilitation. So after I come out of prison, right, if individuals hate me, if they deny me jobs, if they don't want to interact with me, I have no incentive to change. I might as well go back to jail because there is no life here for me. The nuance from the leader of opposition, have a seat, is that individuals are now capable, when we approach them with sympathy, to create a life outside of crime. So the familial structure that brought me into crime is now something I can exit because I have better friends that are not in crime. The job, the economic opportunities that are now present because employers don't discriminate against prisoners now means that I have a capacity to support myself and my family without having to go to the mafia, without having to steal and kill people to get that money. But the second thing with regards to rehabilitation is, if I see the possibility for change, if I see individuals as seeing me as a victim of circumstance, that means I genuinely believe that their perceptions can change. There is a possibility that individuals view me in a different light. Why is this important? Because this means post jail, they are more likely to seek more rehabilitation because they see a chance of individuals changing their perception. In your world, they don't see that opportunity and hence are less likely to try and alter themselves because what's the point at the end of the day? Secondly, with regards to closure, I think there's this huge pop-up coming from the side of government, right? Because literally they say that they're okay with creating reasons for the crime. They are still okay with justifying and telling us why the crime happened. But here's the problem. If you're okay with that, sympathy is still created to some degree for that criminal. And if that sympathy is created, then all the harms that you talk about happen as well. Secondly, why are this debate is about movie and TV shows. Documentaries exist on both sides. Movies and TV shows have a profit incentive to be as extreme as possible. So they either make you love the criminal or they make you hate the criminal. So in the world of government, they are more likely to make you hate the criminal and they must defend the portrayal of demonizing these criminals. They cannot cop out and say that, oh, we will look at the criminal and justify what they are saying, and we will also look at the victims and view them in the most sympathetic light. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. Secondly, so why is it that victims are more likely to get closure? Because notice that we gave you specific characterizations of why victims are often angry, right? That they're often angry because they hate the person that committed this crime. This resentment, this hate that constantly is in them because they view you as an intrinsically evil person. And I think the point in which you let go of that hate, the point in which you realize that it wasn't that person's fault that my son was killed, is because of the structures that surrounded him or her. I think you're more capable of not despising that person and you're more capable of letting go of that horrible emotion. But secondly, the point in which you have better rehabilitation, as we have proven, there's also less fear that is created and hence leading to better closure. So when you understand that that crime was committed because they loved someone, because it was a crime of passion, and that love was the same reason why you miss your son so much, I think that relatability allows you to gain some level of closure and more closure than they would have been. No PIs? Cool. So, fourth, we think, and here's the thing, right? We think victims are more likely to report crimes. And why is this so? Because I think victims are more likely to feel like these individuals are more likely to change. That criminals are not set in their ways, and there's more of a capacity for the prison system to do something for them. And at this point, victims are more likely to report these crimes. But even if you don't buy any of this, in principle, we take this. Why? Because we think that criminals are victims of circumstance in most cases. People are often coerced into crime. People are often don't understand why crime is bad because of the familial structures that they were in, or they were normalized to it. And as a result, they don't deserve to suffer as much as people think they should. Even if there are genuine sociopaths in this world, we don't think a person that isn't as guilty as they think should suffer as much as every single criminal. We rather protect that seemingly innocent person that isn't truly guilty for the crimes that they have committed. But secondly, when so many people currently opt into crime, they're willing to risk all the social consequences you talk about, which is exactly why the root of the problem isn't the social consequence, but the causes of welfare and the lack of education that we need to cater for. For all these reasons, let's view criminals as victims of circumstance and not intrinsically evil human beings. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Now, the government will come and present his case. Kenya.
Yes, sir.
We need to recognize that in both sides of the world, victims of circumstances are always going to exist, and they're always going to commit those crimes out of those circumstances. The question is, on which side are these people more likely to opt into a life of crime? In which side is deterrence more effective? In which side protects these people from being labeled as ex-convicts for the rest of their life once they fall into this dungeon as a result of the irrationality of circumstances? These are the questions that we need to answer to decide which side should take this debate. So before I move on to answering those questions, a few rebuttals. Before that, important clarification. People or victims of circumstances are people who are just generally irrational because they are so overwhelmed by their circumstances, because they are so overwhelmed by poverty. So they are more than likely to want to opt into a life of crime because of the time urgency. They don't look at what happens post coming out of those circumstances. So we tell you that within these circumstances, they are more than likely to commit those crimes because they seem as the easiest and most convenient alternatives. We think then it's the responsibility of the government or the state to actively tell these people that it's wrong from the get-go. Even if we have to be as hardline as possible, even if we have to discredit whatever your circumstance is like, your background is like, we are all for it. Because we think it's more important for us to protect these people in the future. Maybe these people are going to struggle, but at least they won't opt into a much convenient alternative out of time urgency. These are the kind of problems that side opposition is always going to be complacent in. And then they wanted to argue, and moving on to rebuttals, right? How they wanted to argue that rehabilitation works on their side. I don't think so. Because if rehabilitation, if you're going to assume that integration is definitely going to happen the moment you attach an emotional part to backgrounds, that's when rehabilitation centers become that much more complacent. Because they understand for a fact that reintegration is always going to happen regardless. Because people are always going to be accepted back to society. Therefore, there's no incentive for you to fund money for rehabilitation. But the moment you understand that it's difficult for reintegration to happen, that's when you put in a lot more effort to make your retributions much more important. You make these things that much more efficient because you understand that society is not one that is very, very forgiving. That you say that you increase the standards, and that is a standard that you're willing to fight for. No, thank you, I'll take one later. And how they wanted to argue that now victims are also suddenly going to start reporting more of what happens to them. I don't think so. At the point at which you romanticize your perpetrator because of his circumstance, you say that it's justified for you to steal, it's justified for you to kill that particular person because of what your background is like, that's when victims have no incentive to come out. Because you say, oh, it's fine because the person who did those things to you was someone who was affected by circumstance. So there's totally no point in them coming out. I don't see why these people would suddenly want to come out to society. So moving on to the first question. which side solves crime better, or which side has the more efficient deterring factor. Because how their world looks like is, in their world, you have better rehabilitation as they wanted to claim, but I think I've already told you why that doesn't exist. And then they wanted to argue that more social integration does happen. Sure, maybe you have people with better narratives or people who are more forgiving, but you're still going to be labeled as an ex-convict. So it's difficult for you to get social mobility. You cannot buy houses, you cannot get jobs because there are companies with policies saying that it's not right for us to employ people who are ex-convicts. Within these circumstances, I think yours is a side that pushes people back into a life of crime. Because they cannot get jobs, because they cannot get houses, people automatically go back to the easiest alternative which has been effective for them in the past. That is the incentive for why people would suddenly want to opt back into a life of crime. Because those things have worked in the past, and your retribution isn't something that's sufficient enough because they're always going to be subjected by emotions. Because your emotion is always going to play a role in the kind of punishment you give to these people, therefore your punishment is not one that is objective. Your punishment is one that is diluted and one that is washed down. So it's not sufficiently or it's not objective enough to provide sufficient deterrence for these persons to not want to repeat it in the future. They need to prove why their rehabilitation is suddenly going to work, and why, even if integration happens and this whole labeling does exist, why this person is still going to be integrated. Yeah, either one of you.
Yeah, you're more likely to have more political will to fund rehabilitation programs when I view criminals as people that are able to change and that were victims of their circumstance before. So there's capacity to change.
Okay, sure. Maybe you have these things, maybe your rehabilitation, and this is in their best case, where rehabilitation sectors become a lot better than they are. Problem is, you're still never going to get the social mobility. So maybe you get people, or maybe your people on the ground accept these people a lot more. But it's difficult for you to grow as an individual or an ex-convict. It's difficult for you to become similar to people in your community. It's difficult for you to get a job that pays you when you work from 9 to 5. These kind of things will never exist in their world because that labeling as an ex-convict is always going to exist. What does our world look like? In our world, we stop these people from the get-go, or we try as much as possible to completely inhibit the number of people who are going to opt into a life of crime. We concede that it's never going to be efficient. But the comparative is that that's obviously going to have less people who opt in for these crimes, right? So the comparative is that you have less people who suffer in the long run. You have a lot more people who don't automatically opt in for these irrational decisions. You tell these people, and it's difficult for you to get back to your family members, even if all you're doing right now is stealing a piece of bread for your child. You say, sure, you're giving your child a piece of bread right now, but in the future, you can never see your child again because you're always going to be thrown into jail. You're always going to be labeled as ex-convicts. Your child is not going to respect you in the future. These are the kind of things that we think is important for you to characterize and tell people who are generally irrational in nature so that you deter them from a life of crime. I think that is what a good criminal justice system should look like. Secondly, on the whole issue of closure, because I think this is very important, and they wanted to provide closure to perpetrators of the crime because they are victims of circumstances. I think I've already told you why, even if you do provide closure, that's only a facade, because it's only something that is subjective to people and how they see those things, and it's not something that can objectively provide you benefits. But secondly, we think it's more important for us to prioritize the closure that you should give to victims. Why? Because they are the direct people who experience the harms. These are the people who are affected because of because of the ineffective deterrence factors within the criminal justice system. Within the criminal justice system, within these circumstances, are more responsible to pander towards those victims because these are the people who are affected due to their ineffectivity. So therefore, the question then becomes, how are we going to prioritize these victims? We tell you that the moment you punish your perpetrator as much as possible, that's when you provide sufficient closure. I've never been prouder to propose.
Yes.
I think the government waiting for that speech. I now like to call upon the opposition with
The problem with society is that it's one that is pumped and filled with hatred for ex-convicts. It is one that is unwilling to understand the circumstances that push them towards that crime in the first place, and it's even more harder for individuals on the ground to say that they want to have better rehabilitation for these individuals if in the first place society believes that putting longer sentences and just throwing them into jail, fueling their anger, is going to be the solution towards those problems. Two questions I'll answer in this debate. The first, where is rehabilitation and integration better? And the second, on the closure of victims. So the first question I'll answer in this debate. But first, let's point out a principal inconsistency where they try to tell you that the labeling under our side of the house is bad. We think it's far worse under your side of the house when the movies and books that you read always continuously depict these criminals as violent, vicious individuals with malicious intent all the time. This means that the labeling and the ability for you to accept them is one that is extremely hard when the society itself is one that is bought over by ideas of hatred and fueled with rage and anger. But secondly, the labeling of ex-convicts becomes 10 times worse because the idea of an ex-convict under your side of the house is one that is malicious, and it's very hard for people on the ground to be willing to accept them or help them in any form of way if they think they are malicious and they should be the ones rotting away in prison cells. But secondly, here's the thing where it's really important, right? Where do we get the political will for a better rehabilitation? So we'll prove to you now. Number one, we think that the political will that we exclusively garner on the side of opposition is one that is positive, because the people that watch these kinds of movies and they read these kinds of books believe that the crime caused is by circumstance. This means they look forward towards things like providing better welfare for poor people so they don't have to steal in order to provide for themselves, because they recognize that the root cause of many crimes isn't because of malicious intent, but because of their own circumstance. This means people on the ground have more of an incentive to remove those root causes of crime, to prevent the crime from happening, not isolating these criminals from society. No, thank you. But thirdly, here's why the diversion of anger and hatred to victims or criminals is incredibly important. Because the anger under our side of the house is not placed specifically on the criminal for the things that they do. But we think that anger is placed on the failure of the state to provide for these criminals to prevent the crime from happening in the first place. That they had to be pushed to the circumstance where they believe that they could throw away everything and risk going to jail in the first place because of how dire their circumstance was in the first place. No one bothers to understand why they committed a crime in the first place, and that's why a lot of the policies that side of the house has is fully based on consequences and hatred. Here's why that's bad. Number one, the rehabilitation that they have under their side of the house is fueled by retributive ideas. This means you don't necessarily try to make sure that these people don't recommit crimes anymore. It's just so that, here's a consequence as a result of the crime that you made. So it's not going to be things like teaching you skill sets for you to make sure you don't need to commit the crime anymore in the future. We think it's incredibly important to ensure that the rehabilitation that you receive is one that is fueled with compassion, because it helps you realize that you can reintegrate to society in the future. No, thank you. And here's the thing. A lot of times, when prisoners leave prisons after they finish their sentences, they are fueled by anger and hatred. The reason why I'm in jail in the first place is because of that victim. And this is the kind of mindset that is further hampered under their side of the house when they keep having less integration under their side of the house. We don't think it was fair for them to say that integration was not something important in this debate. But on to the second question I'll answer in this debate, on this idea of closure. No, thank you. So I didn't understand this thing where they kept trying to tell us we need to protect the closure of victims from these kinds of movies. Why would a rape victim watch a movie about rape in the first place? So we have a lot of things like trigger warnings to ensure that protection of the victims in and of itself within society. And the reason why a lot of people, the market people that we're trying to market this to are the people that watch this, are the people that can change structural problems within society. We think that they are afraid, a lot of victims when it comes to crime, are afraid that their criminals come back to them angry and they look for them again. This is the type of fear we remove when we recognize that society is more accepting towards these individuals in the first place. When you're more receptive to criminals, when you're more receptive to ex-convicts, this is when you place less of a fear when attached to them. This means you allow victims to have better lives as well, because you don't associate like your past experiences with pure hatred and fear. You make everyday lives of these victims easier to pass because of one is filled with compassion instead of fueled by hatred that is constantly perpetuated by society and the movies that you watch. No, thank you. And this is also the link where we prove that it's more likely for you to come out as a victim also, because you recognize that when you report that individual, he's A, going to get better rehabilitation from society, but B, he's not going to come back out of jail angry and out to search for you. And these are the types of assurances that outside of house exclusively gives towards victims. We think the comparative is this. Both sides of the house have a lot of emotions involved within their cases, but we think it's more important to show individuals compassion, because we told you that they are forced out of circumstances a lot of times, and the fact that we paint it as a sympathetic picture also means that society is more willing to help you instead of demonize you as an individual in the first place. You're more easily accepted in society because of how society views you in the first place. That's why you need to ensure that the reaction that society gives you is one that is fueled by compassion instead of hatred and rage to put you back into jail every time. The reason why a lot of ex-convicts feel the need to recommit those crimes is because the root problems of those crimes still exist there. Because you can't find a job, which is what both my speakers already told you about. If we eliminate the problem of the root cause of that crime in the first place, that's how we prevent ex-convicts from recommitting crime. And we think that's only achievable in a world where people on the ground feel the need to show compassion towards these individuals instead of throwing them back into jail.
Yeah. I thank the opposition win. Now to sum up the case for side opposition replied. Here.
The side of government fell victim to the same thing that a lot of people in our society currently do. We hate criminals because we don't understand them. We hate criminals because we view them as evil entities that intrinsically have something malicious against us, against our family, and against society. Before moving on to the issues that should define today's debate, which is firstly, where is rehabilitation and integration better? Secondly, where do we create less victims? And thirdly, where do we have better closure for victims? A couple of fundamental problems with that side of the house. Firstly, they tell us, like especially the Gov Whip speech, right? A lot of his rebuttals are contingent upon labeling being worse in our. But labeling is definitely better in our because we don't hate them for being ex-convicts. Sure, they still have the label of being ex-convicts, but we don't view that term of ex-convicts as intrinsically malicious or as intrinsically evil. But this points out a really huge contradiction, right? Because if government whip says that labeling is less harmful in their world, then all the deputy prime minister's benefits of strong social consequences through labeling is diminished. That means the deterrence that they get in their world is lessened because the labeling, as they say, is less malicious in their world. First issue, where is rehabilitation better? What did they tell you to this? Only one thing, that individuals get more complacent. We told you two things. One, you can't say people get complacent because the reason why rehabilitation is better to begin with is because there's now more political will to make rehabilitation centers better. So So rehabilitation centers cannot be complacent because better integration will take place anyway, because rehabilitation centers are the reason why better integration takes place. But secondly, we think we are less likely to become complacent because we don't just hate them. We place more emphasis on rehabilitation now because we see some capacity for these individuals to reform. We have a higher likelihood of thinking that there is some change that can be made. There's more political will to support rehabilitation as opposed to more prisons and higher incarceration rates. What do we tell you? One, that we have more funding towards rehabilitation. That just means that more better facilities for rehabilitation can be created when there's more political will to this. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, even post-jail, if I still feel like a criminal, I am more likely to reach out for rehab because I don't want to hurt the society that is now being so nice to me. I have less incentive to go against society, the point in which I feel as if they don't hate me. I feel as if there's a chance that I might reintegrate back into society. In their world, they are more likely to recommit the crime, the point in which they feel there is no life for them to return to in this society. Secondly, with regards to victims, they told you that they would deter victims. One, perhaps you deter some people right now, but we already told you that the situations that create the criminals are not something you solve. So eventually, situations get worse and worse until criminals eventually have to act out. We already told you this in Leader of Op. But secondly, here's the nuance, right? That there are more criminals that recommit crimes, and hence you create more victims on a net. So you create more victims than you actually protect. But what do we say? That we are more likely to create less victims in total because we solve the root causes, right? So it may take more time to solve the structural problems, but the point in which we create more political will to solve those structural problems means we reduce the amount of criminals, and we break that cycle of individuals recommitting crimes. But lastly, with regard to closure, they told you they are locked up longer. But what was our response to this, right? We told you that you may be locked up longer, but the hate and the resentment that you have still exists because by virtue of that person still existing and still being alive, you still hold so much resentment toward that person. So the only way we actually solve this problem is by taking away that very resentment, by taking away that very fear. And the only way we do that is when we give you someone else to attach that blame to. And that are the structures that created this criminal that you deem so horrible. Only in that world do we solve the structural problems that create criminals. Only in that world do we see criminals as truly human. Thank you.
I think the opposition replied. Now to sum up the case beside government, the government replied.
I think the problem with their side is there was no context as to what are the kinds of criminals that are usually depicted and usually glorified in these kinds of movies they were talking about. They made the assumption that the vast majority of individuals out there who commit these kinds of crimes are just victims of circumstances. And even then, we've already proved that even though there's a different percentage of individuals having different kinds of factors, we say we do get to combat these kinds of problems. It was unfair that all of the justifications as to how this actually works only came out in the whip speech. I think it's really, really clear since the get-go that our stance is that in our world, we depict these kinds of criminals in an extremely realistic manner. This means that society has a critical perception of these kinds of individuals, not a complete sympathetic perception towards these kinds of individuals. Don't let them misrepresent what our stance is in this degree. So there are three main issues in this debate. The first was on the perception of victims of circumstances. Look, I think it's a zero-sum game, fighting over whether or not who's I think like in one vote you have individuals being depicted as malicious, another vote you have individuals who are depicted as sympathetic. So at best, this is a zero-sum game, right? But in our vote, we ensure that these are individuals who have less of incentive to act out the tendencies that they have, because they realize that these are the demonizations that you actually have. You realize the terrible consequences that Jordan Belfort actually had after he was actually convicted for all of the fraud that he committed. This means that at a net basis, even if you can have all of your rehabilitation benefits, even if you do have a much more loving and affectionate society, it means that in our world, less of an individual even go to prisons in the first place, because when these individuals have dilemmas, they see more of a reason for them to not opt into these forms of life of crimes when they realize the severity of these kinds of issues. The second issue was on the closure of victims, because I think this is why they lost out most in this debate. I think it's ridiculous for them to just claim that, oh, if I was the parent of a son, I would feel that it's easier for me to move on because I realize that the death of my son is literally like the product of what society is doing right now. No, I think that since first speaker, we've already told you that even if you do not directly see these kinds of things, you do have conversations as to how is it that these shows are actually depicted. It means that it will always, even if you can have all of your trigger warnings in your word, it's still triggering when you realize that society actually glorifies individuals who rape individuals, actually glorifies drug traffickers in Narcos, for example, and depict these individuals as really individuals who have legitimate grievances. These are the vast majority of criminals that we have right now within status quo, who actually make the active conscious choice to actually murder or to harm individuals. I don't think that you can just get away by just talking about victims of circumstances. But the last thing to say is on this whole thing on rehabilitation in prisons. So insofar as they wanted to talk about rehabilitation, they never prove how is it that love and affection actually translates into benefits, when the very wording of the victims of circumstances itself tells us that there are various different kinds of factors that actually compels these kinds of individuals to commit these kinds of crimes. There was no proper justification as to why is it that they will eventually be deterred from these kinds of crimes in the first place. I think at the point at which they realized that they could not win the argument on deterrence, they actually refused to engage with this. Right? But we tell you that in our world, it's really, really clear that even if they are victims of circumstances in our world, these are individuals who realize that social consequences are really, really bad, and realize that you will get demonization if you were to ever opt into a life of crime. If more people realize that society isn't just as sympathetic, that society isn't perfect, and therefore I must actually make the active choice to actually take my own heart, my own life into my own hands. I think I'm very, very proud to propose. Yeah.
I thank both houses for the debate, because the first shake hands and we'll be back to the results soon.